Hi guys!
My name is Mokiana Mar Karina Robaledo.
My name is Kate McLeod.
I'm Isabella Quintana.
I'm James Abdulluri, and the topic we'll be talking about today are the opposing sides of the topic of abortion.
For our class, Introduction to American Politics and Government.
And we're from the Sandy School of Creative and Performing Arts.
Our millions of adoring viewers have been asking us a lot of questions, specifically concerning American politics and government. And we have a lot to say on these issues. Our first topic we'd like to delve into is abortion. And we've all separately researched this.
Yes. My subtopic was about intimate partner violence.
My research was about how states should or should not enforce parent consent laws.
I researched red families versus blue families.
And for me, I looked at late-stage abortions and abortions in the third trimester.
Our first claim is the groups that support abortion are typically left-leaning and are all for advocating for other rights. They support abortion to support women and their right to choose when it comes to bodily autonomy.
To support this claim, I found some evidence from the New York Times on an article called Red Family, Blue Family. It stated that liberals sometimes argue that their preferred approach to family life reduces the need for abortion. And in reality, it may depend on abortion to succeed. The teen pregnancy rate in Blue Connecticut, for instance, is roughly identical to the teen pregnancy rate in Red Montana. But in Connecticut, those pregnancies are half as likely to be carried to term. Whether it's attainable for most Americans or not, the Blue family model clearly works. It leads to marital success and marital prosperity, and it's well suited to our mobile, globalized society. To support this evidence, my reasoning is that with access to their rights, specifically in abortion healthcare, the left's beliefs and policies lead to success and prosperity. This evidence shows that liberals continue to have a supportive view on abortion and similar policies, because when they allow these things to happen and give resources, people in the blue states are more successful because they've been given that choice. Since abortion healthcare is more available, living life without needing to raise a child when the time isn't right gives opportunities and support under the blue social model. And liberals are all about that.
One of the studies that I researched quotes, researchers found an increase in homicide rates during peripartum in states that limit abortion. This quote is important because it shows that supporters believe abortion restrictions help value life more and prevent violence overall. They think that by limiting abortion, society will focus more on family support and fewer choices that harm life. Many people show this belief through this debate, through pro-life groups, and by supporting stricter abortion laws.
Since my talk was about how states should and should not enforce parent consent laws, I put, quote, no one would ever want a minor to have major medical procedure without the permission of a parent. I said this because teenagers usually don't have the right amount of knowledge about the process and side effects of getting an abortion compared to how much knowledge parents have about the process of getting an abortion.
Okay. And for me, one of the reasons that I have for it is talking about how mothers experience late-stage abortions and the reasons for it. One of the articles I read was from a mother who unfortunately had to go through the process of terminating a late-stage pregnancy, and it was due to complications in the heart of her child that was found very late. And it documents her thought process and her reasoning behind why she had this. And it highlights why people that are pro-choice and people that have these abortions late into their pregnancy do it, and how it's a hard decision for them, and why they would, be struggling to fight for this cause.
For the people that oppose this topic are those that adhere to religious beliefs, as it appears to be the root of the reason why those who are conservative, who are usually also religious, believe that abortion is a great sin.
Some evidence to support this claim comes from an article from Gale in Context Opposing Views. It states that opponents of abortion, who generally refer to themselves as pro-life, typically object to the practice for religious or ethical reasons, contending that the procedure amounts to the killing of what they consider to be a human life. Polls results also showed a partisan divide on abortion that has widened over time, with 85% of Democrats believing abortion should be legal in all or most cases in 2024 compared to 41% of Republicans. To support this evidence, I say that this supports the claim showing why conservatives are pro-life and how that manifests itself in polls and studies. Here we see that the 69%, which is now larger than the supermajority, believe that abortion should be illegal. With this number, you can infer that the majority of conservatives are led by religion and truly believe that by making abortion services illegal, they are doing nothing wrong.
What I have to say, my evidence comes from one of the articles that I have researched, and it just quotes, states that are under abortion restrictions are found to experience a 75% increase in peripartum homicide. And my reasoning for this is that opponents say that when women can't access abortion, they might stay in abusive or unsafe relationships because they have fewer options to take care of the baby. They believe abortion access is part of women's health and safety. And furthermore, opponents also argue that stricter abortion laws can make abuse worse, especially when combined with access to firearms. They show their beliefs in protecting the rights and safety of women facing violence.
In the article about how states should not enforce parents' consent laws on abortion, it has been stated multiple times that teenagers don't feel safe in telling their parents about their pregnancy because they feel like their parents will improve the fact they were pregnant at such a young age and how it can develop an abusive relationship because of this. My reasoning for this is how it shows why opponents have this view because how states should not enforce parent consent laws for abortion because sometimes teenagers don't have a good relationship with their family, which causes them to be afraid to tell their parents. It has been stated that even from a loving and supportive family, a young woman died from having a legal abortion because of being scared to tell their parents.
And as for me, for late-stage abortion, one thing that they talked about a lot is how late-stage abortions are unnecessary, and they talk about this through their reasoning of like, if the mother needs to go through a procedure that is dangerous to the baby, then instead of having a late-stage abortion, they could induce labor to have the baby delivered early into the care units for children, which have a 90% rate of survival, or they can have a C-section. And so they're trying to argue their point that there are alternatives to killing your baby if that's what you need to happen in your situation. And so that's all for the introduction of the pro side and the con side for abortion. And now we'll be talking about another question that we've been asked, which is about how this is relevant to the Constitution and the goals that the Founding Fathers had for us in the founding of our country. And one way that we looked at this was about how abortion rights protect liberties. And we all agreed in this, and we all have our own reasons why, and we can start with Motiana.
Yes. So my first piece of evidence, so in abortion from Gale, it says that abortion is strongly connected to the idea of individual rights and government power. Supporters believe that women should have the freedom to decide what happens with their bodies without the government taking away that right. And this goal is not being met today. We still have plenty of debate about abortion, and our president today strongly and proudly is pro-life. When abortion access was restricted in some states, it made plenty of women lose that freedom for themselves. This shows that not everyone's liberty is being protected as the American founders wanted. Till this day, people are still debating, fighting for these freedoms through protests and plenty more.
For my piece of evidence, I said in one of the articles, quote, Teens facing a crisis pregnancy feel compelled to travel to another state where there is a less stringent parental involvement law or no such law at all to avoid involving their parents and maintain their privacy. This shows that the goal about protecting liberties and abortion have not been yet met. It is due to the amount of teenagers having to travel across the country in order for them to maintain their privacy and avoid involving their parents just to get an abortion.
Like Melchiana, I got evidence from Gale, and it states that before the Dobbs ruling, 13 U.S. states had passed trigger laws that would outlaw all or most abortions if Roe were overturned. But not all went into effect immediately after the decision. Some triggered in the beginning of a process to ban abortion, while others triggered the ban going into the effect. Some laws were blocked from taking effect, while lawsuits against them moved through the courts. In some states, nearly all abortions became illegal, with some not allowing exceptions in instances of rape and incest, or when continuing the pregnancy could be fatal. Since Dobbs, states have passed new laws either protecting or restricting abortion. And this evidence is supported as it shows how this goal isn't met on a national level, but is met in some states.
Mm-hmm.
Since the Dobbs ruling, it has only really been up to the states and their rules. So several states, primarily red states, have outlawed all/most abortions, going against the founders' goal to protect liberties of expression. Then, other states, despite the Dobbs ruling, continue to protect the liberties of their people by passing laws to protect abortion.
And as for me, the reason why I agree that abortion rights is tied to protecting liberties is that the Roe versus Wade decision was based around the ruling that the right to privacy and the right to bodily autonomy is protected by the Constitution. And when this was overturned in, I think it was Dobbs versus Jackson, you know, they're saying that the constitutionally protected right is not true anymore. And they're saying that, you know, in the Ninth Amendment states that rights that are not specifically written in the Constitution are still protected. It says, it's talking about unenumerated rights. And through this, their overturning of Roe v. Wade, they're basically changing their mind about what is counted as an unenumerated law and what isn't. And the second goal of founders that we think abortion rights are relevant to, for this one, it was a little bit more split, and we have a three-way agreement here and MM disagreeing. So the three of us thought that abortion rights is related to representation for ordinary citizens, and Emma makes the argument that it defends national interests, and we'll be hearing her out right now.
Yes. So the reason why my option was to defend national interests was because during my research, I was able to quickly align to this part, and my evidence states that in the article, anti-abortion laws increase intimate partner violence rates. Researchers showed that states with stricter abortion laws have higher rates of violence and homicide among pregnant women. It shows that when women don't have access to abortion, they end up in more violent and dangerous situations. And anti-abortion laws do not increase intimate partner violence rates. Others argue that there isn't much information or proof that abortion restrictions cause more violence. Another quote in these certain different articles states, researchers found an increase in homicide rates during peripartum in states that limit abortion. And Tanya Zarkisson says that intimate partner homicide is absolutely an epidemic of preventable violence. And here's my reasoning to that. So these two sides show that this goal is still being debated. Some people think that restricting abortion helps protect personal liberty, while others believe it puts women in danger. And defending these national interests should include keeping citizens safe and protected.
Thank you, Emma.
Yes.
And for us, we'll kind of talk about why we believe that it's about representation for ordinary citizens. Does anyone want to start us off?
I can start off. For me, why I think provide representation for ordinary citizens is a best fit for my category because, quote, teens facing a crisis pregnancy feel in the article about how states should not enforce parent consent laws on abortion, has been stated multiple times that teenagers don't feel safe in telling their parents about their pregnancy. My reasoning for this is that the goal of providing representation for ordinary citizens has been unmet due to the fact that many states in the U.S. still need to provide parental consent laws, which means that they don't provide representation in women's needs on their own body and rights. Through policies that allow minors to not need parent consent laws are demonstrations to how it provides representation for women in today's world.
So Kate's slipping down a brownie, but I'll continue on with my reasoning for why it's relevant to protecting or providing representation for ordinary citizens. For me, what I learned was that a lot of abortion policies and things that are restricting abortion is coming from, right-leaning places, and of course, this has to go through Congress. It goes through the Senate and it goes through the House of Representatives. And one thing about this is that House Republican, only out of their 234 members, only 19 of them are women, whom this policy actually affects. And so when I'm talking about representation for ordinary citizens, right now what I'm seeing is a disparity between, people that are actually affected and people that are making these policies that would impose restrictions on the liberties of other people. And that's why I believe that it talks about representation for ordinary citizens. Bella?
Well, I also chose, for my second choice, provide representation for ordinary citizens. And while looking back at the American founders, providing representation for ordinary citizens consisted of a citizen-elected representative to govern and fight for their beliefs. And while looking out for women who can't fix their problems because of the fact that abortion isn't considered a legal form of health care, it is important that representation is provided for ordinary people who need it the most. Some evidence I found to support this states that red states have far fewer abortion providers than blue states. Thus, the lower numbers of abortions arguably reflect the regrettable lack of access to abortion in these states. For example, Nebraska has 2 abortion providers. New York in 2005 had 261. Mississippi, which has one of the greatest number of women living in poverty, has 1. And I got this from a New York Times article called Liberals, Conservatives, and Abortion. And this evidence is supported by my reasoning, as I say that due to red social models versus blue social models, the act of providing representation for ordinary citizens is both met and not met, depending on what you believe. Everyone is getting political representation in our country, but it just depends on where you live and what you believe in if you're happy with it. For example, if you're a conservative in Nebraska, your beliefs and views are represented in abortion policies of your state, while if you're a liberal and need an abortion there, you'll feel that you have no representation in politics whatsoever. So it's all a balancing game.
And so that's all we have for the goals of the founders when they started this country. And so now we'll talk about when they started this country, what were the fears they had? And one of the fears that we know they had was a fear of tyranny. And the reason for this is the founding of the United States which came from our founding fathers escaping from England, yes?
Yes.
Escaping from the king and their tyrannical
Fighting back.
reign. Yep, fighting back. And so the American fathers were afraid that it would just happen again in the new America that they created.
And they wanted to prevent that.
And how did they prevent that, my friends?
With checks and balances.
Checks and balances.
And separation of powers.
Okay, and so that's what we'll be talking about right now, is how checks and balances are directly tied in with our topic of abortion rights. And who would like to talk about our claim?
Me. Okay, for our claim about checks and balances is that each branch has the ability to counter or challenge powers of other branches. Abortion operates them under abortion operates under them due to the branches having the ability to counter the other branches from protecting or eliminating abortion laws.
I can continue on as to why checks and balances are related to the topic of abortion. And my evidence for this would be when there was a bill that was being proposed to restrict abortion in June 20th of 2013. Our president at the time, which was President Barack Obama, said that he won't sign the bill into law as, quote unquote, it shows contempt for women's health and rights. This is related to checks and balances because one of the powers the president has, the executive branch has, is the power of a veto. And what the veto does is basically when something is proposed by Congress and passes through Congress, the president can either sign it into law or they can exercise their power of a veto and send it back to Congress to be revised. And in this case, President Barack Obama said he would not sign the bill, and so it was not passed, and he exercised his right to check the power of Congress, of the legislative branch.
So for my evidence for the checks and balances, I have a hefty amount, so please bear with me. First point is that Donald Trump has repeatedly said and boasted that he has killed Roe versus Wade. This is his quote. After 50 years of failure, with nobody coming even close, I was able to kill Roe versus Wade. Without me, there would be no 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 15 weeks, or whatever is finally agreed to. Without me, the pro-life movement would have just kept losing. Thank you, President Trump. And this is found on lifenews.com. Another point, quotes, Roe versus Wade allowed a person living in any U.S. state to exercise the right to an abortion at their own discretion through the end of the first trimester. In June 2024, the Supreme Court issued an unanimous ruling in FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, rejecting a lawsuit that would have restricted access to a progesterone. And lastly, the Abortion Overview explains how abortion laws have been shaped by court decisions and state laws. And this matters because the checks and balances make sure that no branch just gets to decide on abortion stuff alone. It is a balance and contributes to everyone has a say on the abortion laws, and so no branch doesn't take over.
For my evidence that relates to checks and balances, it says that in the late 2010s, in anticipation of a conservative majority on the court, lawmakers in some states began passing legislation to safeguard the right to legal and safe abortions in the event Roe v. Wade was overturned. In 2019, for example, New York passed the Reproductive Health Act, which removed several restrictions, decriminalized abortion, and limited government interference with the decision of women and their health care providers. Before Roe's overturning, 10 states had state constitutions protecting abortion rights. As of June 2024, 21 states and the District of Columbia had expanded or protected access to abortion, though the governments of some of these states were challenging those protections. I got this from the Abortion Overview article. And for my reasoning, I said checks and balances have been used on abortion because of the fact that other branches, such as the judicial branch, could have the power to make court decisions about whether or not abortion should be legal or not. Checks and balances are able to avoid tyranny by having the branches not have the ability to challenge the power of the other branches.
And to support this claim, I found evidence from the GEPI stating that in the year following Dobbs, the U.S. maternal death rate rose in states where abortion access was illegal or highly restricted. According to a January 2023 report by the Gender Equity Policy Institute, pregnant people in states where abortion is banned were up to 3 times more likely to die during pregnancy or labor or soon after than pregnant people in less restricted states. Babies were 30% likelier to die during their first month of life in states with abortion bans, and teen birth rates were twice as high in abortion restriction states. In states, people are choosing to deal with the abortion laws that differently based on what they think will bring balance. And of course, people in red or blue states will be biased to their or red or blue beliefs. So in red states, to them, bringing balance and controlling power comes through making their beliefs come to power, like where abortion was banned. While in blue states, their beliefs will be prioritized and their majority will be brought into power. So we can see here that this balance of power can result negatively, specifically in red states when it comes to abortion laws.
That's all we have for the checks and balances that the founding fathers set when they created this country. Next up, another way that they try to combat the introduction of tyranny is through the separation of powers. And the separation of powers is basically the way our government is formed and divided. We have three different branches of government. We have the legislative branch, which is Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. We have the executive branch, which is the president and his cabinet. And we have the judicial branch, which is mainly headed by the Supreme Court. And this is very much tied into our topic in many different ways, and we'll be all talking about it here after our claim.
Our claim about separation of powers is that it divides national power between different institutions, in this case are the branches, and abortion operates under them due to branches having specific roles in deciding abortion laws.
And then I'll continue on with my evidence. So it's very much related to our topic because one of the branches of government that is deeply related is the judicial branch through the Supreme Court. And the reason for this is that the Supreme Court is the one who does all of the rulings. So if we look into the past, in 2022, we have Dobbs versus Jackson. The ruling of that was the outcome decided by the Supreme Court. We also have Roe versus Wade, which was also decided by the Supreme Court. So basically, they decide the rulings and how the Constitution decides what is protected and what isn't. And this shows how it's very much related into the history of our topic and how our topic will continue to be influenced in the future.
On the topic of separation of powers, when looking back at the American founders, it was mainly a protection from major tyranny. So, looking at abortion rights, this division of powers is what can prevent or support laws concerning abortion, whether we like it or not. Some evidence to support our claim comes from Gale, and it says that President Joe Biden issued an executive order aimed at protecting reproductive rights in July of 2022, following the Dobbs ruling. The order directed federal agencies, including the FDA and Federal Trade Commission, FTC, to develop plans to protect patient privacy, safety, and security, as well as ensure access to comprehensive and reliable medical information and medical services, including abortion and contraception. The Biden administration's ability to affect abortion rights remain limited without congressional action. And this evidence shows how the separation of powers is used because it is a clear example shown through a real order. Even though, according to blue ideologies on abortion, it was a positive order that was in line with the goals of the founders and the Constitution, without support of Congress, a balance couldn't be achieved, and the order couldn't be put out. So no matter if an order is positive or not, it all depends on the separations of powers to keep things in order.
So for my evidence, I just use everything that I said in checks and balances, but it matters because the separation of powers makes sure that no branch has more power or gets to make abortion decisions alone. President Trump talks about how the legislator is making the laws, how the executive branch can push laws and policies, and how the courts check the law. These branches play their own role in order to enforce these laws on abortion so that no branch rules over one another.
For my piece of evidence, I said, quote, after Roe, the Supreme Court heard several cases that challenged the ruling and helped refine abortion law. In Planned Parenthood v. Danford, 1976, the court ruled against several restrictions imposed by Missouri's abortion laws, thus expanding access to abortion. 1 year later, however, the court ruled in Mayer v. Roe that state governments could choose to deny public funds for an abortion, granting the government additional control over reproductive health care. The Mayer v. Roe decision took advantage of the Hyde Amendment, legislation passed by Congress in 1976 that excluded abortion from the list of medical services provided and covered through Medicaid. The federal and state governments program that subsidized medical costs for patients with limited financial means. For my reasoning, I said separation of powers have been used on the topic about abortion because since the judicial branch usually are the ones that analyze laws and check if the law is unconstitutional or not, it usually keeps the other branches in check since they have other roles to worry about. Separation of powers are able to avoid tyranny since because the branches have been assigned their own jobs and roles, it prevents the branches from having the ability to overpower another branch.
The next question our viewers asked us is how the compromises to ratify the Constitution plays into abortion today. While looking at these compromises, there are 3 options: the Great Compromise, the 3/5 Compromise, or the Electoral College. And there are some split views here, 3 versus 1. And Kate, Melchion, and I believe that the Great Compromise is the thing that impacts the United States most today. The Great Compromise established a lasting structure for Congress and balanced power between large and small states, while focusing on the goal of equal representation. It created the Senate with 2 state legislators and the House of Representatives, which would have representation for states based on their population. And this has had a lasting impact on the U.S. government system as it created the modern American Congress system. And in today's world, it tries to create balance. Some evidence I found to support this is from American Politics Today, our textbook, and it says that abortion rights have been a perennial topic of debate since a 1973 Supreme Court decision held that state laws banning abortion were unconstitutional, although this ruling was ultimately overturned in 2022. Surveys about abortion rights show that public opinion spans a wide range of policy options, with little agreement of which policy is best. Such conflicts reflect intense differences of opinion that are rooted in self-interest, ideology, and personal beliefs. Moreover, in such situations, no matter what Congress does, many people will be unhappy with the results. So, as we can see, Congress and the Senate and House within it has been impacting American politics for years and years. Within the taboo topic of abortion, Congress has dealt with different views and problems about abortion. Based on this information, we know that Congress has dealt with many conflicts, and although people don't agree, different states with different beliefs get to be represented and try to fix these problems due to the Great Compromise.
I also agree with everything that Bella has said, and for my piece of evidence, quotes, by 2024, 14 states had near total bans, while 21 states had protection. Another quote was that Louisiana and Missouri, both of which restricted abortion access, had the highest homicide rates per total state population. And this matters because the Great Compromise shows how balancing power between big and small states still affects the U.S. today. This compromise ensures that both small and large states have a say and a voice on abortion.
For my piece of evidence for the Great Compromise is that parental consent requirements are not unique to the abortion issue. Parents must give consent for other medical procedures, excluding emergencies, including matters such as ear piercing or receiving aspirin at school. In light of this fact, it is odd that parental consent is not required in all states, considering the risk that abortion procedure carries with it. No one would ever want a minor to have a major medical procedure without permission of a parent. It is reasonable to expect that the same common sense parental consent measures that apply to every other medical procedure should also apply to abortion. My reason for this is that depending on how big the state is, the population would be able to affect any law. The states that require parent consent laws show how, depending on the population of the state, determine whether or not a state should enforce parent consent laws, instead of having this entire U.S. follow one singular law.
You know what? While I respect that argument, I respectfully disagree, and I believe that the Electoral College is a compromise made to ratify the Constitution, and that it impacts our topic more than the Great Compromise. And the reason for this is, just as a little background knowledge, the Electoral College is our way of electing the president in the United States of America. Instead of a popular vote, which is what most people would think, what actually happens is that people vote, and based off of the vote in the state, representatives of those people will then come together, and they're the ones who actually decide who is elected as president. And the reasons for this was because at the time of this being implemented, there were many fears with giving that much power to the people. One of them being that people were completely uneducated at the time. And so my reasoning, my belief as to why this is more important is because this process is what helps us elect our president. And there are cases in history, including our current presidency, in which the president loses the popular vote, which means they lose, the majority of Americans voted against them, but they are still elected because of the Electoral College, which they win. And this affects our topic because depending on whether the president is left or right leaning, they are more open or more against abortion laws. And this is reflected in the people that they bring, and reflected in the laws and the bills and everything that they're trying to pass. Because one of the ways that legislation is introduced to Congress is through the things that the president declares as their interests. And yeah, that's where I disagree.
Okay, so our viewers ask, what is federalism and how does it apply to abortion rights? So federalism is a system concerning the division of power among the local, state, and national levels of the government. And there have been and continue to be several forms of it throughout the years in the US government. What are your thoughts on federalism?
Okay, well, for me, I believe that anybody would be happy with a federalist approach as long as their views are the ones being represented through it. And my reasoning for this is that when you're saying that a topic is taking a federal approach, it means that it's being, protected or restricted federally, which means it is going to be throughout the entire country. And an example of this in the past was until 2022, until the Dobbs versus Jackson ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, abortion was protected federally throughout the entire United States of America, which means that anywhere you went, abortion would have been protected. Now that it's been overturned, that's no longer the case. But what I'm saying is that whoever is being represented, in their case, before 2022, the people that would have been happy with a federal approach were people that were pro-choice because it was their views that were being seen and represented throughout the entire country. But if it was the opposite way and it was restricted, then it would be them who would be happy.
For my piece of evidence that relates to federalism is that the majority of Americans oppose banning abortion altogether. For example, in May 2024, the Gallup poll, only 12% of respondents indicated a belief that abortion should be legal under all circumstances. In the 2024 Pew Research Center poll, 63% of U.S. adults believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases, compared to 8% who said it should be prohibited in all cases. For my reasoning, I said, in this case, this piece of evidence shows the benefits of federally based approach on abortion because it shows how banning abortion should be required nationwide and not just the states. Banning abortion altogether won't be able to deprive women to get an abortion anywhere, which could later then cause women to get an illegal abortion.
For my pieces of evidence, I have 4. One is that in 1973, Roe versus Wade gave people the right to have an abortion. In 2022, the Dobbs case took away federal protection for abortion and gave states the power to decide. Roe v. Wade legalized abortion nationwide up to viability. And lastly, the Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization overturned Roe v. Wade, which was influenced by a conservative majority of justices on the court. And this matters because it shows abortion laws stated with federal protection and highlights how Supreme Court leadership changed abortion laws, like President Donald Trump. State numbers proved how divided the U.S. is on about abortion.
Okay, thanks. Well, looking at the federal government and how it approaches this topic, we know that the federal government's approach to any problem is to promote the general welfare. So this means taking care of problems that Americans can't solve on their own. So when it comes to current issues concerning abortion and the cultural divide and beliefs about it, the blue side would mainly want a federal government approach to dealing with this so it secures abortion rights and prevents states from banning them widely, and then the red side would want to have a federal approach so they could secure anti-abortion laws. And my evidence comes from Gale, and it states that in 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization that the U.S. Constitution did not guarantee the right to abortion. And the decision overturned the court's previous ruling in Roe versus Wade. And I think this reasoning supports the evidence because the Dobbs ruling was a Supreme Court case, which is a federal court, and the decision that the Constitution didn't guarantee abortion rights is also a federal ruling that the whole country has to deal with instead of leaving this to a state.
Different types of federalism that have been implemented, and 4 of these are dual federalism, cooperative federalism, coercive federalism, and new federalism.
And through our research, we found that we do not all agree on which is the best for this country. So we're about to debate this out.
We are split. We have me and Milkiana in agreement for cooperative federalism. We have Kate in agreement for
Dual federalism.
and we have Bella in agreement for
New federalism.
And so we'll start off with, who wants to start with their argument first?
I think you two.
I think you
Let's go.
Okay, Emma, do you want to handle that?
Yes. Okay. So federal and state governments work together to create and implement policies best suited to abortion policies because it allows states to grant help while getting federal support. My evidence for this, quoted by Gale, states that until 2022, ruling in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, Roe v. Wade allowed a person living in any U.S. state to exercise the right to an abortion at their own discretion through the end of the first trimester, around with 12th week of pregnancy. States were allowed some power to regulate abortion access during the second and third trimesters. The Dobbs ruling, however, ended federal protections for abortion rights and returned to the states the authority to determine abortion law. And this matters because this evidence shows that after the Dobbs, states got full control over abortion laws, which directly affected women, especially those who have gone through IPV. Cooperative federalism will still let each state decide on abortion.
And I can elaborate a little bit more on cooperative federalism. So basically, just a little recap, cooperative federalism is when the state and government work together to enforce policies. And, and evidence of this in the past would be, I've spoken before previously just a little bit on the history of Roe v. Wade. And before it was overturned in 2022, they had a very cooperative relationship. The way it worked was that it would be protected by the federal government, abortion would be protected, but the states were the ones that were able to decide, they were able to regulate abortion access during the second and third trimesters. And so, my argument for this is that cooperative federalism obviously worked for over almost 70 years, right?
Yeah,
When was
wow.
it worked for a long time until it was overturned in 2022, and re-implementing this would practically have the same thing. I'd say that allowing abortion to be protected, but allowing the states to determine the gestation period to which it is allowed would be able to represent people to the fullest. But also, on the contrary, allowing, on the flip side, if I were to look at this from a different perspective, also, if they wanted to, for the opposing side, I could say that they could restrict abortion, but allow it in certain special circumstances decided by the states. And that's my argument for cooperative federalism.
Okay, valid. So I was all about new federalism, and new federalism is a political philosophy all about advocating for the devolution of power from the federal government and giving it to the states. So I think it best suits the topic of abortion and cultural divides and opinions about abortion policies, because it would positively affect the laws and rights of abortion health care for blue states. But on the other side, it would negatively affect the women in the red states, unable to get health care based on the majority of their state's political views. So I think it's something good and bad, but it's better than the rest, which is honestly very true for a lot of political things nowadays. And my evidence comes from a New York Times article called Liberals, Conservatives, and Abortions. And it states that red states have fewer abortion providers than blue states. Thus, the lower numbers of abortions arguably reflect the regrettable lack of access to abortion in these states. For example, Nebraska has 2 abortion providers. New York in 2005 had 261. Mississippi, which had the greatest number of women living in poverty, has only 1. Women lacking health insurance and affordable birth control are the same women who cannot afford to travel long distances for abortions. Mr. Dudat, who is the author of another article this is responding to, should not assume that women are not having abortions because they don't want or need them. And I think this approach of federalism would be helpful in the topic of abortion and conflicting red versus blue ideologies, because most people would get what they want. Conservatives in red states getting pro-life laws in place, and liberals in blue states being able to have pro-choice and determine their future while being able to get an abortion. So it's like meeting in the middle, and that's why I think this federalism is one of the best.
She's chewing.
Sorry guys. 1 second.
Who am I?
In my opinion, I think dual federalism is the perfect fit for abortion. No offense. But dual federalism is the divided power between state and federal government. I believe it would suit best my topic because the state governments have different policies than the federal government, meaning that abortion rights would be decided through state policies and not the federal. For my evidence, I said, quote, there were no federal standard for abortion laws, which were left to the discretion of state legislators. By 1967, 49 states and the District of Columbia had classified abortion as a felony crime in most cases. That same year, however, Colorado passed a law. This piece of evidence shows why this approach is federalism. This approach to federalism would be helpful because if the state and federal governments have different policies, abortion rights would be decided differently.
Thank you so much to our viewers. We love you.
Yay!
And this is us on abortion, and we want to know your thoughts. So in the comments, like, subscribe,
And comment down below what you think about abortion.
Thank you. We will be next week with more food. Bigger, better, stronger. We will eat more. Thank you. We love you.
Signing off!
And this is us from POLISCI. Love you. So now we're exploring another level of government, and we're going to be talking about the state governments and their approaches to abortion. So, Denzel, would you like to start us out?
Of course. So now that we're talking about a state government approach, we're moving from the federal level down to the state. So now we're looking about how the smaller individual government within handles their laws. And for this, I said that this would benefit both parties because on a state level approach, you are able to make a difference in your community by influencing what is and what isn't allowed in your area. This makes it so that if you are opposing abortion, you are able to make that change and lobby for that change where you live. And if you are pro-choice, you are able to move somewhere where it's legalized. And this works in an example. We have in June 2024, 14 states had adopted near total abortion bans, while an additional 27 had imposed bans on abortions after certain gestation durations. So what this is saying is that after a certain amount of time, abortion is no longer allowed, but before that, it still would be. And in addition, 21 states had established some abortion protections through constitutional amendments, laws, or court decisions. So basically, this means that depending on where you are, you would be able to see a difference in the law.
My evidence states that this matters shows abortion laws stated with federal protection and highlights how recent Supreme Court leadership changed abortion laws. And state numbers proves how divided the U.S. is about abortion. This evidence shows how states can adapt abortion laws to reduce IPV risks, which is intimate parent violence risks, and the state controls that reducing harm in ways federal laws may not.
So when I was looking at the state government's approach, I found that after federal rulings on certain topics in our government, the state gets to choose what they do based on the belief of its citizens. So when it comes to the topic of abortion, some might want to get a state approach so they can get what they really want in their state, even if the rest of the country doesn't agree with it. The evidence I found from Gale says that in the decades between Roe and Dobbs, activists and policymakers in many states sought to change legal protections for reproductive rights. Through the legislators, bans were passed in anticipation of the conservative Supreme Court majority overturning the 50-year-old Roe decision. As of June 2024, 14 states had adopted near total abortion bans, while an additional 27 had imposed bans on abortions after certain gestation durations, the amount of time since conception. In addition, 21 states had established some abortion protections through the constitutional amendments, laws, or court decisions. And I think that, as seen above, the state-based approaches benefit the conservatives in the red states and the liberals in blue states, whose beliefs and wants were put into state laws. So each state can get what it really wants, and that's the point.
For my piece of evidence, it stated that after the Dobbs ruling, many states passed or implemented abortion bans or restrictions despite continuing U.S. public support for legal abortion. Bans have increased travel to obtain abortions to states where it remains legal and resulted in increased maternal and infant deaths in states where abortion has been banned. My reason for this is that this shows the benefits of state approach on abortion because it shows how having a state law would have their own laws and not follow a nationwide law. Since it's only based on a state law, states that did ban abortion women are allowed to travel to a state that does allow abortion. Because of this, states that do ban abortion has had an increase in infant deaths than states that do allow abortion.